Welcome everybody, and it's great to see so many people here, and Happy New Year. So before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Wurrung people on the land where we meet today, and I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. So today is the first seminar of the Complex Human Data Hub Seminar Series, and we have a special guest, Simson, coming all the way from various places, most recently New Zealand, but before that Germany. Jan is currently at the LMU Munich at the Social Data Science and AI Lab. So that sounds really interesting. And he has a background in psychology and data science. He has worked with Samuel Mehr in the music lab, and I think he's going to tell us about that today as well. And as part of that work, he's been involved in a huge citizen science project, one that I can only be jealous of, that has attracted more than 5 million users. He also has a keen interest in data science, statistics, teaching, and open science practices. So maybe that will be interweaved with the talk today. So today, Jan will tell us about the development of a platform called the Worldwide Lab, an available platform as an open source software platform, I believe. And after this talk, we'll have the opportunity to go for lunch. This is a bit last minute arrangements, but if you would like to join for lunch, stick around a couple of minutes and we'll kind of figure that out. And for now, the floor is yours, Jan.
Thank you so much, Simon. And thank you all for showing up despite being like in the holiday season. So sorry for the timing on my end. So Simon already said, I'll be talking about the citizen science platform we've been running at the Music Lab for the last, I think, 5.5 years it's now, but I rounded it to 5. And kind of the lessons we learned along the way and the software we built. And so this is joint work with Sam Mehr, picture on the left there, who's running the whole thing, who's like the PI of the lab, and Josh DeLu, who built like one of the front-end libraries that we're using a lot, JSPsych. I'll be talking about that. And he's also involved with like now the backend software, and I'll get into details about all these things. First, a bit about the structure about what I'll be talking about today. So first, a bit like just looking back, which is probably like the most fun and interesting part for y'all. Then like just the 5 years of running the website, themusiclab.org. Then I'll be talking a bit about like the technical side, the software stack, what's powering it now, and also what we built. And this last part, we can just see how we're doing with time and also with interest. If you want, I can also walk you a bit more like to the technical, like we can actually look at code and how one would start like their own citizen science website. If you don't get the time for that, it's also like all online, like documented. If people are not feeling it, perfectly fine. And so first is like the teaser. I'll quickly look at like how things look today and why hopefully this will be an interesting talk for you all and why to care about citizen science. So with this platform, like there's a screenshot of it, themusiclab.org. We had managed to attract in the last 5.5 years more than 5 million people like running an experiment. Again, the numbers always like with users, experiments is all can get a bit messy. And this allowed us to do 6 and 2 publications. We have this plus here because 2 are not using any data, actually, just like some experiences we learned along the way, and 6 with like actually using data in fancy outlets across the way, and more things coming up always. And it also allowed us to do like very unique forms of research where like we've had data collected and then post hoc, basically we're like, oh, we have this data laying around. We collaborate with some psychometric people, for example, and we're able to suddenly do like very interesting studies that we didn't plan on doing in the beginning. So these things like just emerging. And also, I think a big plus point in the end, like it's also just really fun, both I think for people to take part in these studies, but also develop them, work with this, get feedback from people, have people kind of play the games or studies you build. The whole thing is actually really fun. If you're not debugging things, that's less fun. So first, after seeing the today part, let's go back in time. All the way to 2019 in Boston. Back then, Donald Trump was president. Feels familiar. And back then I was joining the Music Lab here in Boston. And we started this whole thing. And of course, we had quite a few initial struggles launching this website. There's quite a lot of technical complexity to just deploying things to the web. We were using cloud providers. I mean, if you use something like AWS or so, you'll see like there's this, I think it was like 10 pages or something of just service names. If you look at it, like it's so complicated. There's so much going on. Back then we were using software called Pushkin by Josh Hearthstone at Boston College. Amazing project, but also it's quite complex. Like it's doing a lot of things. There's like all these different services talking to each other. And it took us quite a bit to just like wrangle this thing together, get it launched. In the end, we managed to, and it served us really well. And we launched. At first under like beta.themusiclab.org, we had like 4 tiny games, some from like previous studies. We just kind of threw them online without thinking much about it. And then we waited. We were still like tweaking things. And all of a sudden, we saw that we got traffic. After a bit, we figured out where it was coming from. So The Verge, which is like this online news platform, started posting this article about it. And we didn't actually know about this before. So it really hit us out of the blue. And they were also linking like directly to like this beta website. So it wasn't ready yet really for anything. And everything started burning down. Of course, we were not prepared to handle like multiple concurrent people. Like our things were too slow. Things started breaking. But actually, I would say this is a luxury problem because, of course, it's even worse if you have no traffic at all. So actually, we were like very lucky to have these issues and to have to work around them. But still, there were issues, and we had to get things going. And even like this modern around, like back then, we just were not prepared for it at all yet. Yeah, things started breaking. I was talking ahead of the slides. But in the end, we had to figure out how to scale. So it was actually perfect to learn this thing and also to learn it at a moderate amount first, right? Not being like, I don't know, super popular and then losing all the data. And why scaling? I mean, we could have also just had like a really, really fancy big server somewhere on the AWS cloud, but of course that costs a lot of money. Back then we were also really on like kind of soft money. They're just this one grant financing everything. So we had to really keep an eye on things. And that's why we want like this scaling. And also probably everyone else who runs a citizen science website, if you're not like Google funded or something, you want to just scale up and down to serve different numbers of people. And to at the same time save your money. And also it turns out like this is really a typical problem. Like you don't really, when you run these sort of citizen science websites, you don't have the luxury of just having like nice, consistent traffic, but rather it's like low for a lot of the time, maybe some tiny spikes, and then you get these big spikes in between, which is actually where like, these are the most valuable times in a way, because like this is where you would get the most data, but also this is typically where if you're not prepared, this is where your site is going to break. So like the most valuable points in time, you're going to lose the data. And this has also, we've heard from like other people running the citizen science platform, this is what often occurs. Like you get popular on like some websites, which I'll be talking about like actually on the next slide. And yeah, ideally you're prepared for that. And also one of the problems is this can of course happen anytime. And it doesn't necessarily need to be adjusted with like your waking hours. I think, especially here in this part of the world, you're used to that being like in very different times than many other people. But sometimes it's like, I don't know, 2 a.m., 4 a.m., you're sleeping. And then on the other side of the world, there's a lot of traffic coming in. Some post is getting popular about your website. So it's good to be prepared for this. And talk about traffic. We've had different traffic sources coming in for us. I think there's something that can be interesting for people if you're also looking to recruit, because of course that's also a really hard thing. So for example, we had this YouTuber, Adam Neely, who's like in the music scene, like a famous YouTuber, who actually made a very critical, like we made this game called the Musical IQ, and it was a bit like, yeah, I mean, calling it IQ, and it's a very loaded term in psychology, but of course it sells kind of well to people. Like people love doing like IQ games, getting some score on an IQ scale. It works really well for people. They love it. And he was like a bit like giving us like, I don't know, like it's a loaded term and everything. But it worked really well. There's not really bad press for these sort of things. We got a lot of traffic from this. So that actually then other people like also started like, I don't know, like using like based on his YouTube videos, other YouTubers did it. And then like this was, for example, one of the most long-term sources of traffic for us, because people just keep coming to these videos. They see him play these games and then they do it themselves. And the nice thing is that this just keeps coming in. And yeah, this is like our panic Slack posts about this thing back then. Also Reddit, for example, it's like the social media website where you can upload and download posts. I think now it's becoming really big. Has worked really well for us. This was more in the past. I think nowadays it's a bit harder, but I think these were like some of the biggest concurrent numbers we've seen. This was like in Google Analytics. So I think it's probably even like under counting the number of concurrent users on the website. This was one of like where we really scaled up quite a bit to handle that. We also had like more orchestrated launches where we like talked to people back then when Twitter was more like academically popular, and had like kind of these concurrent posts, which was never like that crazy in terms of the traffic it attracted, but also it really helps to especially get like early on data. If you also have like a timeline for some conference or something, also mailing this still nowadays can actually work quite well, but pretty good success with that recently. And also just other sources. Like the nice thing is once you're out there for like a bit and some people have posted something or just yourself and people have at least seen it, you also get like this cross effects. People posted it, like we've seen traffic sometimes coming in from like the most random sources. Like we've had some Polish Reddit version where of course we saw like through backlinks where the traffic was coming from. We couldn't read anything, it was all in Polish. But we could see like the picture from the logo and really interesting. We had Twitch streamers playing these things live, and then the people who are watching them are playing it themselves, which is really interesting. And of course, also, I mean, that's one of the things, like also this gets interesting research-wise, right? Because I mean, you see people already seeing ahead in the games and stuff like that, like something to also keep in mind when then evaluating data and yeah, other YouTube videos. And also, I mean, we have this online website, but also it doesn't need to be online. Also, just because we have this running, we're able to do very interesting in-person studies. So this is at the Auckland Museum of Transportation and Technology, MOTAT, and a project by Juliet and Courtney Hilton. And you see here some kids like in this, it's like this really kids-friendly like science museum, and they just set up some iPads and computers and they could just play in there. And there was like, I have some pictures later with like high score boards and everything. They could just walk in and play these games. Some other learnings we had along the way. So we cannot anticipate these spikes. Like to some degree, we can try posting things, but like the really big spikes, they just kind of happen. At least for us, this was the way. And one of the things we handled this in our group was then to have alerts basically, so that like we get at least a notification when we see this spike, but of course we cannot always look at like the user numbers or something. To then at least be like, okay, oh, it's worth investigating, it's worth looking. Even with auto scaling, having it set up, it doesn't always work, or like maybe we have some like bounds on it to of course not have to like pay exorbitant amounts maybe. So sometimes we also need to increase the boundaries of this to then really handle it for like high on Reddit or something. Another really interesting one, I think, is that traffic kind of bleeds over between different studies. So if you not have like a single citizen science game or study running, but rather multiple, you can get benefits from like having traffic come from one game to another. So we have like actually two games that are like really quite popular on this website, but they helped a lot. Like, and we're not doing that much research with these anymore. But basically, it's really useful that the traffic bleeds over to other studies. So we can still benefit from people. They really love, for example, like this tone deafness game. People love learning about themselves. And then we just, at the end of it, we have like, oh, we hope you like the study. Like, are you maybe interested in these other studies that are now like really relevant for current projects? And then we see quite a lot of like this traffic just bleeding over to these other studies. Also, we saw studies evolve over time. So, I mean, it's been 5.5 years, and many of these studies have changed a lot in this time. They used to be like a certain way, and now they're very different. Sometimes we had extra covariate items if they're currently interesting for like some grant applications, for some new projects that we may be thinking about, collaborations. So it's really useful to have a flexible data format, to not have like a rigid, oh, like this is how the data looks, but rather it changes. Sometimes you have, for certain studies, certain items coming in, sometimes they disappear. All of this stuff varies a lot. Of course, also another thing where you need to be flexible is that if you run anything in the internet, data is also going to be messy. Like people might be playing on their phone in the tram or something in the underground. Like now they have reception, now they don't. Like all these things can also, to some degree, you can try and capture this and just have very robust data collection. To some degree, you're also going to have weirdness in the data. Another weirdness we saw happen sometimes is, for example, people using translators, and then they see the whole website in a different language. and then there's different translators, and some of them really do weird things to your website. And then suddenly you have weird characters in your data or something. You didn't really anticipate this at all. It just happens. Yes.
So do you mainly deal with these weirdnesses by just sort of designing studies where, you know, you don't need all the data for them to be useful? Or is it a lot more just on the sort of programming side of trying to be alert to sort of catalog the weirdnesses of, oh, you know, this dropped out, but, you know, we'll make it so that if even if you drop out, then the study doesn't die, or like if people are using a translation thing, you note it, or like how do you handle it?
I would say something in between, right? There's always like these unknown unknowns, which is part of the problem. Like this translation thing, we just didn't know about it till at some point we're like, oh, okay, this must be the reason for this data coming in different than we thought. And I think to some degrees also helps to have your study designed in a way that like it's a bit flexible for these things. I think there's already like a bit the next point. You're already getting ahead of me. That also not everyone finishes the study. So like it's really much more helpful if you have studies where you can use partial data. Of course, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like this can depend on the research question. I think in the papers themselves, we often, if we can, we also try to be flexible, and then like for different analyses to use whatever data we can basically. And maybe one analysis can only use like complete data, but maybe another one we can use partial data, and then we can use as much data there as possible. And of course, we're transparent about this, like always in the actual results sections. But then you can make the most of it. But yeah, of course, you're often restrained in like what you can do, like research-wise. Of course, the research question is going to determine it in the end. But yeah, we also see that not everyone finishes the study. So with that, we always also collect partial data. So after every response, we collect the data, not just at the very end of the whole study, because at least on our website, we don't have like monetary incentives for people to participate. And that, of course, leads to like a more like dropout throughout the study. It's just like always goes down a bit. Then also, and this is again, I think probably more of a luxury problem, but at some point, our data exports started taking a while, because we also did like some processing of the data along the way, because we have this very flexible data format, and we wanted to get into something that's easier to work with in like R. And also we saw that different people use data. And of course, not everyone, like, I don't know, maybe can handle like or just wants to handle like a complex data export pipeline. So we have like these regulated scheduled exports just like running in the background. And then we also just have like some data sitting around for people to use, especially, for example, like thesis students or something. They don't need to like get into the in and outs of the whole platform. They can just use some data to write their thesis with. Yes, and this is running on our own on-premise service, which was actually like a nice learning to just have this like completely set up, because of course, I mean, things can happen in the cloud or something. So it's nice to have this like in our on-prem service. Okay, talking a bit about gamification, like the thing of making it fun. One of the things we learned is that points are surprisingly effective in just motivating people, like just giving people scores and like having counters to go like plus, minus, up and down. That already goes a long way. We also recently added like leaderboards, so you can see like where you are on the scale, and like people love that. I think the biggest thing is that people love learning something about themselves, right? Like our two most popular games, like on the one hand, the tone deafness game, and the musical IQ one. So like you get the score in the end, you have something to share. Like it's amazing. How are you comparing to others? You get like some curves. You see, okay, like I'm in like whatever percentile, and it's like amazing for people to see this. And then we also give them some like graphs, and they can like share these if they want to. And the fun thing is like with these things, like if you get this graph and like a distribution, it doesn't matter. Like it's not only the people doing well on these that share it, right? It's like typically like the two ends of the distribution. Like if in the middle, it's kind of boring, but if you're on either end of it, like it's fun, right? Like either you're like really horrible at it and people love to share that, or like you're doing really well, and of course people are proud and love to share it. Like both sides are actually work really well. And sometimes the game or the gamification part and the research can be unrelated. So we've also like had some studies where we're like actually interested in one particular like research question, but the game part was like completely different. Like it was actually two parts in the same study. One was just kind of to attract people to kind of like make it fun for them to take part, and the other part was the actual research. And then still maybe later on the game part, we're going to publish something about it because it is like interesting data. but not right now. It wasn't like the main motivation. And then it can also even like work. You're actually like really flexible with this, and like it can take some playing around, but even just, I mean, testing this yourself, I think often you already get an idea of what's fun and what isn't. Like if you test this and you're like, oh, like now I'm doing much better than before or something, like you already feel the gamification kicking in basically. Yes.
Example of one of the ones that where the game wasn't the main point and you were collecting different data from it?
Yeah, it's actually a very recent one that I'm like currently finishing getting like into camera ready. So this was about that was about like perceptions on AI, I would roughly say, or ML, and the design of like an ML system. And that was like the research part of it. And we combined that with like this game about detecting whether a song is AI generated or not, and which is also like it's also actually really fun. Like even just myself playtesting, it's like it's really hard to tell the difference. Like either you know it and then you're fine, the song, but if you don't know it, it can be really, really hard nowadays. And that was like completely different things. But now we're thinking of like, okay, maybe we can do something with this first data. It's also an interesting question whether people can tell the difference or not. We'll see. Like that's currently up in the air. Hal's had a question, right?
Yeah, and the learning about themselves, yeah, I totally agree. This is a great motivator. Where I kind of have sometimes sort of wondered how you get off the ground with is how do you start that, right? Because you don't have a distribution then of people to compare it to. Like, do you kind of like for the first ones just make something up or like, approximate something? And also later on, are you calculating it ad hoc, like comparing them to everyone, and calculating it anew, or do you have some sort of static data that you're comparing to? Yeah.
So far we typically have static data or have things that are like run every once in a while, because I mean, especially at some point you don't see a lot of shift anymore. Thankfully we got around well throughout the cold start problem. Because at least for the tone deafness, like we had a scale for that. Basically, like there's like an official cutoff. And at first we just showed that, and then at some point we added the distribution once we had it. And for the MIQ, that was even better because we just like reused from collaborators some of like their implementations. Like on the technical side, that's also like a really weird and interesting study. But basically they developed this whole like psychometric scale. And so already like all the math and everything was there, right? Like we had like proper I forgot in which format they do the scores, but like it's basically like z-scores or something, so we could just convert it. And like they did all the maths and everything. Like it was a very easy problem, and they already had like data collection. So I think that's of course the easiest way to get around it. I think else, I mean, you can just also do something like do a cold start with like just static scores, and you can just be like, you can do like hard cutoffs. It's like, okay, this is a great score, this is a medium score, this is a horrible score. And then once you have like a bit of data, you can start like doing the distribution part. I think, yeah, that's probably the easiest. Yeah.
With the gamification part, is that something that you looked at systematically? Like, was that something where you had hypotheses about?
Unfortunately not. Like I would actually really love to go on this road. So far I didn't have the time, and like it of course needs like some more like experimental setups and everything. I think we did some like low-key things of that, but really a lot of it was just like eyeballing it. And because always I mean, it's the music lab, so like the research direction is typically more towards the music side. But I've always like since the very beginnings, I've always had like in the back of my mind, like I'd love to do this like more systematically. I also think one of the things, like if anyone's interested in these sort of questions, you can either ping me and then I'll forward you to Sam, or like you can just reach out to Sam directly. He's a very open person, and I think there can always be like options for like great collaborations here, or like just adding some A/B tests or something, right? Like into the study, and then you just collect this data as well. Like there's really many opportunities for these sort of things. Is there one more question or? And also like with the gamification, this also doesn't have to be online. Also there's some pictures from the museum as well. And there, for example, like they had this like really manual scoreboard, but like with like magnets, they would just write the scores on these tiles and they would magnet them on there. And then throughout the day, at some point the kids, like whoever's like, I don't know, like in the first X or like the winner, they could like select one of the merch items in the museum and then take home. So of course also there's like many things are possible, right? You don't have to be limited to the online scope of things. Okay, I think this was the very fun part. Now let's get a bit to the software part. Hopefully still interesting for people. So just looking a bit like what's powering this whole experience, right? Because of course, also you need something to run these things. So we have this front end. That's the website itself. I think now that I'm currently in the process of like thinking of like writing more elaborate things on these, how does like run your own citizen science website. Now I'm even thinking like this might even be split into two parts, I think, the front end, where like you have this website itself that you see here, where like you have like some information about your lab, about the different studies you have. And then you have the studies themselves, which are, I think, also a separate thing to think about. Because also typically they're like kind of, you use different code to do the two. It's a bit disconnected. But we have this front end side that's running in the browser on people's computers. Also an interesting problem actually, because this is running on people's computers. So you don't have control over the device. They use different browsers. It's getting pretty good. I started working in web development like years ago. Back then it was like horrible. You had like Internet Explorer being around and things didn't work and you had to do really horrible things. We're like in a much better time now. So it's pretty okay. And you have like libraries like JSPsych that take care of like some of the worst parts of it. And you have this backend, which once you do any data collection, you, I think, always need, is like the place to store the actual data. So this is a server running somewhere. This is also, you can do front-end stuff pretty much for free nowadays. You can host it somewhere for free. Backend, you almost always have to pay for. And this is, we're, for example, using AWS. There's other providers. Sometimes it's also university providers. Ideally, you have some provider that like allows you to scale up and down. This is typically something you could, in theory, also run this yourself in-house. People often don't do it because, of course, this is something that needs to be online, up all the time. Like this is a server that needs to be running 24/7. You don't want anything like breaking there because once anything is wrong with that, you don't get data. And already, of course, you have the code side of maintaining things, which is difficult enough. So you don't want to worry about the hardware usually. That's why people pay for these cloud providers. And again, right now we're using AWS. The plan with this whole worldwide lab, which I'll be talking about like more from now on, is also that we support multiple cloud providers like out of the box, basically. But first talking a bit about the front end, the side that's running in the browsers. This is now really focused on this experiment itself, less like this website where you have multiple experiments. Here we're using JSPsych that's been developed by Josh DeLu. It's a very popular library, really nicely maintained and also like really well designed, I feel, to so that you don't have to know all these things about like running things in the web. Like it really takes care of a lot of the complexity. It's a very like beginner friendly library. It's battle tested. This thing has been running for like a while. And basically you use like HTML and JavaScript. Like HTML is like a markup language for showing things on the web. Very roughly saying JavaScript is like more for the logic side of things. But again, a lot of this is like abstracted away in this library, which is really nice. Yeah, so the way studies are typically set up in JSPsych is that you have like this timeline, and in there you have like different trials that are actually shown to the participants. So like trials roughly like a stimulus. Also, all the language around that is like really psychology focused, which is nice. So you have like stimulus. And it's also like they have done a lot to like get like proper response time measurements and stuff. Like there've been studies, okay, how much is like delays in different browsers and this sort of thing, if you're like doing more of like the hardcore psychometric things. And that's the best animation, this whole slide deck. And so within every trial, like this is roughly how it looks, right? Like, so you have like this is called like JSON roughly. Or JavaScript. And in there, you have like these different objects with the curly brackets. You give it like a type. So this is kind of like the type of trial you're going to show. And you give it like very basic information. So for example, here we have like a gender item. You have different choices. We add some extra information to basically identify this later on in the data. And then this is what you show in the end. Like this is what people will see. Nice bit of text and like 3 buttons. So like a lot of the complexity is just kind of hidden away. You can focus more on like the basic setup, the logic behind it. There's like many different ones of these plugins or trial types, and you can also build your own if you need something very particular. But that's basically what we use for our studies in the site. And it's nice because people don't need to become like full-on web developers to, for example, if like a grad student wants to develop a game on the side, you don't have to worry about like a lot of the complexity. Still some, but not all of it. Then the other side of things, the backend. This is where we store the participant data. Usually this happens in the database because it adds up the data. And then databases are just really, really like amazingly good at working with data and doing things fast, doing many optimizations. Like I said, it needs to run like 24/7. Typically, we do this with a cloud provider, and this does cost money. We always try to limit the amount of money this costs. So, for example, with the software I'll be talking about, like on the next slide, I think it starts at least at like roughly like $30 a month in USD. To keep this running like 24/7. Of course, these costs will all go up the more data you have, basically, right? Like once you have like, I don't know, gigabytes or something, like you have to pay for their storage. But it's pretty okay. And I'm currently looking to getting this down further. And the software we're using for this is called Worldwide Lab. So like, I think starting like 1.5 years ago or something, we started working in this. And basically it was just like our own flavor of having like a backend software to run the whole site. This has now been powering the site for like, I think almost a year. We've been adding like more and more features, piece by piece. And yeah, it's like open source backend software. And we tried, of course, there's still some complexity in this, there always will be, but we tried to get out of as much of it as possible to like make it easy to use. The whole thing is scalable, or it is designed to be scalable so that you can like have more and less instances of it running. So basically the way we scale these things, like if you have many people, we just have like 10 versions of Worldwide Lab running, and every person gets like sent to one of them. And so this way they can all, or like, I don't know, 50 if it's like many, many people. And this way they can all handle it without being like overwhelmed roughly. And we took that into account like when designing it. We store data on the response level. So basically like all these learnings I was talking about before, like we try to put them into the software. So we store all the data like response by response, then do some processing to also get it like from like this very flexible format in which we store it to like a more nicer format for like analysis, doing some pre-processing basically like in the database. And we have some like, hopefully we'll have more and more of these things as they come up, but we also build like some gamification things into there, like these leaderboards, for example, which are like real-time leaderboards that like you can immediately see where you are. If you're doing like the best, you're immediately at the top of the list, which can be quite fun. And yeah, so like since about a year, this has been running in production, and yeah, serving many, many, many people. And yeah, with this backend stuff, like one of the most intense things of doing is like deploying that to the internet, getting it out there. And so of course there's like different cloud providers that you can use. And already here, like just to show like the horribleness of this out there, even with like just right, even if you chose, like of course there's already like many of those out there, like the different cloud providers. If you manage to choose one, you still have the problem of like all these different services. So I think if you zoom it in, yeah, so you can see like just like different services that they offer. It's like 329. Like how are you even working with this? So really it can be very overwhelming getting into this whole space, which is why I try to like have like as much guidance as possible to get you through there, because that was basically me in like 2019 looking at these things, being like, how do you work with this? Like, is it EC2 that you use to run your software, or like ECS? What's the difference between the two? What do all the 3-letter acronyms even mean? That takes a bit to get into. But yeah, so this is something we try to handle for people. And right now we support this for AWS to basically have this handled. And I'm currently looking into adding Azure to this. And also if you like a bit more technically like a fin, like having worked with maybe like Docker containers or something, you can also just put this anywhere you want. It just runs anywhere, but we're trying to like basically get like these very easy deployments set up for people. Yeah, so that was one of the main things we wanted to address. And now we have like this almost single-click deployment that like sets things up for you. It gives you some auto scaling, and that runs for like roughly $30. That will only ever go up. Yeah, so I think this is the main front up content side of things. Yeah, I think time-wise it's already 40. So we can see, but I think this would be a good time and place for questions from people. Then we can just see whether we want to go further technical or like, I mean, else I can just chat with people if they're interested in that. Thank you. Yes.
So do you have any experiments where participants need to interact with other participants?
Ooh.
Yeah,
Not yet. Like this is also one of the things that's been like floating around. I think just for now, again, this is maybe, of course, a lot of the features and everything is like driven from this music side. And I think we've been playing around with ideas of like, oh, people recording music or something. But it gets like, once you get to the actual finicky details, it gets a bit tricky with like privacy and stuff like that. So we didn't really have the opportunities for that yet. But it's a really interesting thing. And I don't know, maybe if you have ideas, like happy to talk about like, I don't know, getting the features for something like that in there.
I was curious just because I know that tends to be a lot more complexity on the
Mhm.
back end and all of that. And I was wondering how you dealt with that. But
Yeah, so we have some, and I think one of the complexities with this is, of course, also privacy, right? Because this is, again, we try to not have like super sensitive PII data in there. But still, like any data that goes in there shouldn't come out unless to us, right? That's a very important thing about anything like this. So I think for rough things, like we have something set up where basically you can store publicly available data in there. And with that, you could do some things akin to this. But yeah, it really depends also on the setup in the end. What makes sense, I think.
Ben has a question on that.
Is that in the chat?
Yeah,
Or?
so, did you wanna ask? Hi, Ben, did you want to ask your question?
Oh yeah. Can you guys hear me okay?
Not super well.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just interested in like so you're using the container service, right? The on AWS. When you get your peaks, what sort of like say when you're doing 6,000 participants a minute, what sort of prices are you paying then?
Sorry, was it about the? I can try getting the volume up here.
Sorry.
How's
Maybe
that
try
now?
doing that. Sorry.
Oh,
that better now?
does this actually have a speaker?
No, that doesn't have a speaker.
Because it registered as a speaker. I think this one I'm not hearing anything.
Okay.
Okay, maybe. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you well. I hope.
Excellent. So using the container service on AWS at the moment to run this worldwide lab, I was wondering, like when you're getting your 6,000 people through a minute, what sort of how much does the price increase?
That's a good question. I think the magic of this, I don't know the exact numbers from back then, right? I think maybe we were scaled up like, oh, I don't know, like 30, 40 times than what we have for like minimum traffic, basically. Which of
minimum
course for a
traffic
whole
being
month
30
would be
bucks.
very pricey. But then the thing is, right, we only have like this big traffic spike for like, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours. So actually it's not that pricey. Like it would be really expensive for like months. But because it's short spike, it's not a lot of money. Like this is, I don't know, maybe like $20 or something, I think, to do like one of these spikes, if even. I would say, but this is eyeballing it, of course, a bit. Like I think the bigger cost is always like these more continuous costs, like data storage, for example, because you pay that like basically all the time as you have more data, or like running the minimum server, you just have to pay that for like the 24/7. But since you pay for this resources like by the, I think even by the minute,
you do.
by the second, if it's like just for some short burst period, it's really not expensive at all. That's the
So we've done something sort of similar with Lambdas on AWS, where we run JS cycle experiments through Lambdas and back it up.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and that we found that really cheap to do. So cents it costs. So yeah, it's I was it's sort of interesting to see how it actually scaled through the container service. And apologies too. I actually would have loved to have come in today and had lunch with you, but yeah, I wasn't able to. So apologies there.
Yeah, but I'd be happy to have a chat at some point. I mean, I'm still here for like the next 2 weeks. Maybe we
Great.
can find some
Excellent.
time.
Yeah, that'd be terrific.
Would be lovely to hear about your Lambda experience, which is also one of
Yeah.
the things we considered quite a bit back then.
Yeah, we found it scales. I mean, obviously it scales really well, and it's been really cheap.
Mhm.
So yeah, certainly worth thinking about.
Thank you.
Did you say you had something else to sort of, with the optional thing at the end?
Yeah, I can quickly show that. As I think Simon also had a question, or is that resolved?
I mean, if you want to do the optional thing, go ahead. I can keep my question for lunch as well. Sorry.
I can try and be quick about it. Which like originally, I wasn't exactly sure about the whole setup. So I was also like prepared, if need be, to go a bit more workshop-y, which I think in this setup, like that's easier if also everyone has a laptop and stuff like that. But I can show at least like some of the things, like for example, also show a bit the software side of it. So also if anyone wants to try this out, let me switch the share. Let's switch this to.
So just while you're setting it up,
Yes.
market this like a citizen science like software, but could it just be general experimental software if you're just hosting it like just one simple experiment online and say running it on MTurk or
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can. I mean, also, like it's one of the things we try to specifically support this use case basically, because it adds some complexity. But also, yeah, we've been using this for all sorts of things. We're currently now thinking of like, just because we know really well how it works, we have like an instance of this running, for example, to even like store some like basically not really logs, but something like that, like some passively collected data in it just now, just because you have an instance of it. So you can use it for anything. It's just quite flexible in that regard. It's just like basically that's the thing we always have in mind when designing, when adding new features. That's like the first thing we have in mind, basically. Double check the. So if anyone's curious to play around with this, I set up also like a demo instance of this right now, which I don't know, kill in a couple of days, at ws.themusiclab.org. And I don't know, I can send the slides to someone, like there I have the credentials for this, if you just want to log in. Again, all the data is going to go away. But basically this is how the email is workshop, the password is Melbourne. And hopefully we can log in, yes. So again, like this is just empty basically, but if you just want to have an idea of how this looks like, this is the admin side of it, because of course, most of the time you're not looking at this, right? It's just running somewhere. The previous version that was powering the website didn't have any interface. It's just like to help make some things a bit easier, inspect data. But we have like the different, I think it's an interesting way of seeing like the setup behind this. So you have like different studies then we have different participants if we want to collect those. This is actually optional. So this is used to like collect, like if one person comes multiple times to the same, to your website, you can this way identify them in between.
how do you keep track of that?
Yeah, we like in the browser, we store in like randomly generated ID basically. Like there's also thoughts of, for example, adding like login things and everything. Also an interesting tip with this, like we're currently also like based in the way of like, in the process of writing this up for like make like a version 1.0. So it's also like still a lot of change in there and like things are still taking shape, but already it's running. So we're also thinking of like basically this being the first version of it. Like later on then, for example, like also participants can then be identified by like logging in explicitly through like some authorization setup. Then basically we have these sessions, which is like one person like taking part in a study. These sessions are then linked to like studies and participants. And in the sessions, we have like the responses. And then, for example, like if you have a study here, there's like this example one, you can then, we generate like some example code if you want to use this. I think this is easier to show than going into the full. I also have like example things, and also on the website you have like example studies if you want to try these out. But this is basically the code you would copy at the beginning of your JSPsych experiment. If you ever look at like the JSPsych documentation, this will be familiar to you. And we basically just add like this small part at the beginning where we say, okay, this is where we actually, this is the instance of World Wide Lab where we store the data, where this is currently running, and the idea of the study to support multiple studies. And that's basically all you need to add, besides like having the JSPsych World Wide Lab integration, and then your data is gonna be sent to the World Wide Lab. This is like the very, like basically batteries included, like you just need to do the bare minimum and everything is taken care of for you. Or if you want, like we also have like this more elaborate client. If you want to like do custom things, send your data in some specific format, like, I don't know, do whatever you want, basically. And we also have like this leaderboard feature. It's I think a bit annoying to prepare right now. Again, like this is more of the workshopy side of the whole thing, where you could then have leaderboards that like update real time, have scores, you can get them in like different orders and all these sort of things. And this way we're currently like also, again, all of this is open source. So you can also, if you ever feel like, oh, I would love to have this feature, and then like just make an issue on the GitHub page, be like, hey, Jan, I want this feature. Or like, hey, Jan, I built this feature. Here's a pull request to add this feature to the software. So really, for example, like one thing we're currently in the planning phase of adding is like these automated alerts to have them like run in the software and not like on the cloud provider, which is currently the case where we're just monitoring some metrics. And then yeah, if you really looking for the nitty-gritty details, we also have like this API documentation where you can like, again, this is really for the more technical people. If you want to see how this works, if you want to do some custom things, there's like many possibilities here. Also like for specific data exports or something like this. Or like some of these things, like for example, getting counts for like how many sessions are like in a game, right? This is how we give these counts on like the musiclab.org. Like, okay, I don't know, 2 million people have played this experiment, which of course always helps sell it to make it interesting to people. And yeah, I think that's the gist of it, I would say.
So why don't we? I don't have any other questions, otherwise we can.
Yeah, without going like super into the
Yeah,
technical,
no,
I think that's a bit
that's-
over the top right now
Yeah, that's.
and would take too much time.
It's like-
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you all for having me.